Why don't I give myself permission to dream? And is there a part of me that wants to try to dream again in a new way? I have to redefine that. The scariest thing to settle for is barely in existence. And that's what you get with an eating disorder, is barely in existence. It's been a really hard week since that last vlog where we went to the pumpkin house. Let's talk about it. I have been in an absolute emotional spiral for the past week due to just feeling like I've been completely left out of the world and life in general, and also even the recovery community online. I don't feel like I'm a part of it because so many of the conversations for recovery and for motivation for recovery center around things like, do it so you can start a family someday, do it so you can travel someday, do it so you can have this career someday, and all of those things, those aren't things that I can count on as tangible goals. As someone who has multiple chronic illnesses that can be and often are disabling, at least to some degree. I started talking about this topic in the pumpkin house vlog that was right before this one, but then the surprise miracle that ended up happening that night that I wouldn't trade for anything in the world ended up taking over the message of that vlog, so I just wanted to reuse it this today because it's something that has come up time and time again, and that is my inability to dream because I don't feel like I have a lot of the tangible goals that a lot of other people who aren't dealing with the complex chronic illness side of things are able to have and shoot for in life. No one's recovery is easy. Recovery from an eating disorder, as far as I'm concerned, no matter what eating disorder you have, no matter if you even have a diagnosis, no matter how long you've been struggling, no matter to what degree it affects your life, if it affects your life at all and you are choosing to recover from it, it is most likely the hardest thing you will ever do in your life, at least up to this point. And I'm not trying to take that away from anyone. I'm just also saying that when there are people, and I do know others, although the vast majority of people that I'm connected with in the recovery community are not physically disabled or are not necessarily dealing with disabling chronic illnesses, I do know some who are, and it adds an extra layer of complexity because, for me at least personally, it's become impossible to imagine what something like a recovered life could look like. That seems like such an intangible concept to me because I don't have those specific goals that are usually given as examples for people to cling on to keep going through the hell that is the recovery process, if we're just being honest here. Last week, one of the things my coach gave me for homework was a journal assignment. Why don't I give myself permission to dream? And is there a part of me that wants to try to dream again in a new way? And a brief recap of how that journal exercise went. The first time I tried to answer it, I started it off essentially and actually very literally saying, I'm honestly kind of ticked off that I got this prompt because we both know what my answers are going to be. Because my answer is I don't get the luxury of dreaming because those things like that are not things that I can count on as something that could happen in life. I don't even get to count on living a functional life with the added layers of complex chronic illness. And again, no one has any guarantees in life. Even the healthiest objectively person in the world does not have a guarantee for anything they will be able to do, or even for the next day or the current day that it is. But when there's that added layer of chronic illness, it makes it so much harder to come up with any type of vision of what a recovered life could look like because it's just hard to see past the day-to-day limitations. And the uncertainty of chronic illness means you don't know when any of those are going to get worse or better or stay the same or what to expect on any given day in that regard, so it's really hard to plan your life. So the first time I tried to answer that journal entry, it was all from the angle of, I don't get the luxury of dreaming. That luxury has been taken away from me by chronic illnesses that I had no choice in developing, and it was very angry, and I ended up writing in all caps at the end of it, just talking about how settling for anything other than what I've wanted my whole life would feel like a consolation prize, would feel like lowering my standards that have been unwillingly forced from my life. And then I said, I will not settle for a crappy consolation prize. There is nothing remotely acceptable about that. That was the tone of the first time I tried to answer it. And when I was reading that one to my coach, I was overcome with how vitriolic it is, but also how true it feels to me, because despite the fact that I have been physically disabled majorly at times, but to some degree for the past almost decade now, a lot of the standards that I held for myself throughout my entire life have not been possible, yet I still hold myself to these impossible standards, and holding myself to these impossible standards is something that is keeping me stuck from being able to see any version of a recovered life outside of those impossible standards that I've held for nearly 20 years, if not my whole life. in general. So that was how I answered it first. It was very angry, very much filled with all of these impossible standards that I still hold myself to. Even though I try not to, I can't help it. I hold no one else to these standards. I never have. But even though I thought I had not held myself to them, I still am very much holding myself to standards that at this point in my life are not realistic, are not feasible, are things that I need to change, and not being able to do that is keeping me stuck. So I was scrolling through Reddit after I answered that, and I came across a post in a recovery subreddit actually, and the gist of it was someone was explaining how bloated she felt and how much distension she was dealing with, abdominal distension. And I actually found this post because I was experiencing those symptoms and I was trying to look for other people to commiserate with just so I can know I'm not alone, and found this post. At the end of this post, she mentioned a very specific thing that she still had to have on her meal plan that evening, and mentioned that she was going to do it despite feeling like she felt. And for a fleeting moment, I had the thought, hey, I have that thing in the kitchen, but I haven't let myself eat that thing for a year. I haven't had the one that's in there for a year. The one that's in there I bought about a month ago, but I haven't had the courage to try it yet. But I had the thought, I wish I could just go do that. I'm so jealous that she's going to be able to follow through and do that, and that I can't, and I want to be able to follow through and do that. As soon as that thought came, it left, and I kept scrolling through Reddit, and another post came up. This second post was not in a recovery subreddit, but it was a picture someone had shared of a pizza from Domino's, and when I saw that, again, I had the immediate, even if it was fleeting, thought, I am so jealous. I wish I could just order pizza and enjoy it with my husband. And that thought is something that is a huge freaking deal for me to have, because I don't let myself have even that thought, because even something like that is not something that I can have as a tangible goal with all my chronic illnesses, not the least of which is mast cell activation syndrome and many other food intolerances that go with many of my chronic illnesses. I may not ever be able to get a pizza from a mainstream pizza chain and eat it with my husband and not be affected in any way whatsoever as far as like allergic reactions go. However, while I can't do that, that is the type of goal that can somehow be adapted to fit my situation and my circumstances, and something that we could work toward eventually. So maybe I can't do it that way. Maybe I have to have some type of allergen-free pizza with my husband. Maybe I can't be around the smell of worm food because it literally sets off an allergic reaction and I'm scratching my skin till it's raw because I'm itching and burning and have to medicate with antihistamines and mast cell stabilizers. But maybe I'll be able to have pizza that was maybe hot one day and it's cold the next day, and therefore it doesn't have that overwhelming hot food smell, and I'll be able to handle it. And maybe it will be allergen free, and maybe I'll be able to sit with my husband in our living room and do that, or on our front porch and do that, even if I'm not going out somewhere or ordering a classic pizza from a chain restaurant. That is a goal that can be adapted and broken down into steps to work toward, much more so than things like starting a family, traveling around the world, meeting up with other people. Insert major life goal here that I have always held for myself that I really have to figure out how to not hold myself to. So it's more clearly apparent now than ever before. Until I'm able to successfully work with my therapist and work through a lot of the underlying emotions I have about not feeling like I am worthy of living a life if I can't meet those really intense standards that I've always held for myself, and redefining what a successful, what a fulfilled, what a contented, what a joyful life can look like outside of those standards, that's a lot of hard work that I'm still going to have to do. I thought I had done a lot of it. Roger and I were talking about this the other day, and I was explaining to him 5 years ago, I thought I was there. 5 years ago, we were posting daily vlogs on our other channel, and I started almost every vlog saying, this is the day the Lord has made, I will rejoice and be glad in it, and so can you. And I was truly joyful, and I was explaining to him, I was able to do that then because that was 5 years ago. In my mind, 5 years ago, I still had 5 years to get better, to then start to pursue those other things that I've always wanted my entire life. Now those 5 years have passed, it's very hard for me to connect to that because there's no getting time back. There are a lot of renewable resources in this world. Time is not a renewable resource. Once the time is gone, it's gone, and it's harder to dream, and then it's harder to deal with the loss of those dreams as time goes on and you've not been able to reach those dreams. However, find a new way to dream, as resistant as I am to it, as much as my inner critic is screaming at me and saying, no, that's settling, no, that's just a consolation prize of life, no, that's always going to be less than, nothing's ever worth it, you're certainly not worth it, talking to me, of course. It's really evident that the key to being able to move forward in recovery is redefining a life, and what a happy, joyful, contented, successful, and that word is very subjective. I'm talking about, for me on a personal level, what can a life of fulfillment look like? I have to redefine that, and it has to be not the same standards that I've held for myself for nearly 34 years, which are perfection. And then many other things as well, but things that are not feasible right now. And that's a hard pill to swallow because it adds another super hard layer of difficulty to recovery, and it makes it hard to go through the motions when you don't have a clear picture. So I gotta work really hard on finding that clear picture. At the same time, I still have to also take the actions without having that clear picture fully in my brain, because you can't rely on only always having that. You have to make the commitment to take the action. We've talked about that many times before. As with many things, I'm repeating it for myself as much as anyone else to remind myself as I'm recording to go try to challenge myself with the thing that I've been putting off. So I don't know what my life's gonna look like. I don't know if I'll even be able to come up with an idea of how life could be worth living that aren't those impossible standards that I've always held myself to. But I have to at least try. I have to give it a fair try and a full try, because if I don't, I will only ever live a life of suffering. And if you're only living a life of suffering, sure, I guess it can be a life, but really, it's just barely in existence. And that's the worst settling at all. Settling for barely in existence is the worst kind of settling that exists. I literally just had that thought cross my mind. Like, I'm worried about settling for all these things that are less than these horribly impossibly high standards that I've always set for myself, when the scariest thing to settle for is barely in existence. And that's what you get with an eating disorder, is barely in existence. That's not where I was going with this vlog, but that's where it ended up, because I guess it's a message that I needed to remember today. And I hope it was able to help, or at least let someone else know that you're not alone. See you in the next one.